We've got the video stream, Scott.
Jessica, we good to go? Thank you. Ms. Moore, whenever you're ready, we'll start the record.
1 minute.
Thank you.
All right, it's 9 o'clock. Let's do it. Scott, you got the video going?
Yes, ma'am. Y'all have a good meeting.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate you.
Absolutely.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the board meeting today, April 15th, 2021. Courtney, good to see you.
Thank you very much.
Shayna, if you could start this meeting off by roll call, please.
Jenny Moore,
Here.
Pilar Rodriguez,
Here.
Courtney Bechtel,
Here.
Nathan Douglas, Matt Glaves,
Excuse me, Nathan Douglas will be coming in a little bit late.
Ed Keenan,
Here.
Jerry Romero,
Here.
Rodney Riles,
I'm here. Do you got me?
okay, got it. Stephanie Wagner. Madam Chair, 7 board members are present and 2 are absent.
Perfect. We do have a quorum at 9:01. Invitation for public comment. Did we have anybody posting request for comment?
No, ma'am.
Perfect. Minutes. I hope everybody's had time to review the minutes from the March 17th meeting. Any discussion? Any changes? Having none, can I get a motion to accept the minutes from the March 17th and the 18th meeting?
I'll make that. I'll second.
Ed Keenan motion, second by
Jerry.
Jerry. Thank you, Jerry. Any further discussion? Having none, Shayna, would you call for vote, please? Roll call.
Pilar Rodriguez,
Aye.
Courtney Bechtel,
I'm going to abstain since I wasn't there for the meeting.
Matt Glaves,
Aye.
Ed Keenan,
Aye.
Jerry Romero,
Aye.
Rodney Riles.
Aye.
Madam Chair, 6 board members are in favor of the motion and 1 abstained.
Motion carries. Thank you, Shayna. Okay, agenda item number 4. If you guys remember, we asked for Gabriel Roeder and Smith and Company to do an audit of our auditor. And they do have a report for us. Mark, if you want to, I'll turn this over to you for a second because this is your wheelhouse.
Well, this was something that's done every 5 years, according to state law, and the board engages another actuary, an independent actuarial firm, to look at our work product, the most recent actuarial evaluation, and the actuarial experience study, the way that the assumptions were set, and they do a review and of the assumptions, of the results of the evaluation. They get into the methodology, and I'll compliment Ryan Falls and Janie Shaw for their very thorough review. They really looked very closely, and we always look at an actuarial audit or actuarial review as a learning opportunity. And because they've been so thorough, this is a good opportunity to learn some things. So I will say that when I was in high school playing football, we had a coach that would sort of talk to us every day, and he'd try to pep us up. And he viewed high school students as either you're a football player or you're a civilian. And so he would say to us, "Aren't you glad you're not a civilian?" Well, I'm going to use that analogy here. There are actuaries and then there are civilians. And actuaries understand actuarial lingo, and we talk. As much as we try to make it understandable to civilians, sometimes it's hard. So we understand what Ryan and what Janie have written, and because we're actuaries. But some of the things that are in the report, you civilians may think is really dense and maybe even alarming, but it's all helpful. So with that sort of setting the table, just sort of understand that they may say some things you don't quite understand, but they're being very helpful. So
Dense but riveting at the same time. So should we just go ahead and jump right in?
Yes, sir. If you would, Ryan,
All right.
I'd appreciate it. Thank you,
Sure.
sir.
It's great. Well, thank you all for having us here, and thanks for that intro.
Excuse me, Ryan, could you introduce yourself, please?
Absolutely. My name is Ryan Falls. I'm an actuary with Gabriel Roeder, Smith and Company. And joining me today is Janie Shaw, who works with me out of our Dallas office. Like as Mark said, we're an independent actuarial firm, but we're a peer firm of Rudd & Wisdom. We work on public funds across the state of Texas, and we're the retained actuary. So we know both sides of the equation. We are the retained actuary that sometimes get it audited, and we get hired to do this type of audit of Rudd & Wisdom for you all. So we're very familiar with the process. We do understand how complex some of this stuff is. So we did our best to try to to communicate it as straightforward as we can and not get too much in the weeds, but weeds are inevitable at times, especially when it comes to actuarial work. So again, we'll do our best. Happy to answer any questions. I think you all have seen our report. It's marked draft, and that's just because the way the state law is written, that we present the draft report to you all and to your actuary. And then you have the opportunity to have 30 days to prepare a response. And then I think that whole package is then submitted to the Pension Review Board to document the whole process. So anyway, with that introduction, just kind of dive in that I told the actuarial committee this earlier this week, but you all on the surface have a very straightforward, nice little plan, but really when you open up the hood and you dive in, it really is, even though it might not be one of the biggest plans in the state, certainly one of the most complex. It was really interesting to kind of get in there and take a close look at all the moving parts. But you really do have a great plan, a plan that obviously serves a really important portion of our community, the volunteers that serve me. I live in a rural area and served by a volunteer fire department, so I certainly understand the importance of that. And They're not in your system right now, but I've promised to give a sales pitch to join you all down the street next time I see them at the 4th of July party or something, next time we cross paths with them. So anyway, with that, I'm going to dive in. So I'm going to share my screen. It's always a dicey proposition, but I think we got this figured out. There we go. Okay. So just going to start with the headline, and then for better for worse, we're going to go through a little bit more detailed process and some of the finer points that we mentioned in our detailed report. So the summary of the findings is that in general, we do believe that the results are reasonable, the assumptions are reasonable in the methods, and they complied with the actuarial standards of practice. Probably the biggest recommendation we have, and we had probably 8 or 10 in general, but probably the most important one is we talked a lot about in our report, and we're going to spend a few slides later in this presentation talking about the cost method, and that's the actuarial weed terminology for sure, but it's just how we take the liability, your plan, and how we allocate that cost over time, and to ensure that our contribution rates are sufficient, and we really are on pace to paying down the unfunded, which is something I know that we all want to do. So we do have some pretty detailed recommendations around the cost method, and primarily around the normal cost, which is the annual accrual cost for our current active members. And I won't go too deep into that now, because like I said, we do have some slides later. But at this point, what I'm going to do is hand the baton off to Janie and talk a little bit about the process and some of our other recommendations that we had in our report.
Thanks, Ryan. Like Ryan said, I just want to echo what he said. We both really enjoyed working on this project, and we really appreciated the opportunity to work on it. Our review focused on the 2020 experience study, which set the assumptions that were used in the 2020 valuation, which we also reviewed. Given the same set of data, no two actuaries are ever going to set the exact same set of assumptions when doing an experience study. So our review really focused on reviewing that experience study report that Red Wisdom put together, and doing kind of a peer review and making sure we believe that their results were reasonable based on what they came up with. Same thing with the valuation. We would never expect two actuaries to come up with the exact same liability number dollar for dollar. So we were really reviewing their methods and trying to replicate the results within a reasonable range. We want to go to the next slide. So as you can see, we took the data that Red Wisdom used, and based on their stated methods and assumptions, we were able to replicate their liability very closely. And what this really tells the board is that Red Wisdom is really, that they're correctly applying your plan provisions and also their stated assumptions in your report. If we move on to the next slide. Now I'm going to kind of just go over we've pulled out some bullet points from the report. I'm going to kind of go over some of those high level bullet points. But if you guys would like me to go into any more detail, or if the board has any questions about any of these, go ahead and just stop me and we can go into any of these in more detail. We reviewed the 2020 assumptions, like we said. We made note of 2 of those assumptions. These are the assumptions that were changed in the 2020 experience study that had the most impact. So we just made note of these 2 assumptions. They were your termination rate assumption. This is the assumption that actives leave before reaching retirement, and also the commencement age for vested termination. These are the 2 assumptions that made the biggest impact during your 2020 experience study. So we're just recommending that Red Wisdom and the board continue monitoring these assumptions and just make sure that they continue to be reasonable up until the next experience study. We also are recommending a potential enhancement to the next experience study, looking at what we call an amount weighted approach when doing an experience study. What this basically does, it's putting more weight on the experience of members who maybe have higher benefits, which would then result in a higher liability. And the purpose of this is really just to reduce future gains and losses and future valuations. Looking at that second bullet point there, we also reviewed your investment return assumption. This is your major economic assumption, the 7.5%. This is comprised of 2 components, your real rate of return of 4.5%. We reviewed that component, which we believed was reasonable. It's also comprised of an inflation assumption of 3%. We believe that was maybe a little bit high, maybe a little bit hard to justify. So we just recommend the board and Run Wisdom again continue to look at that assumption and maybe look at it before the next experience study. And the last bullet point, at the very end of the report, we also make a couple of recommendations. These have nothing to do with the numbers in the report. These are kind of the appendices in the back of the report that probably no one ever reads. But this is really just to add a couple more points in the plan provisions and the assumptions just for clarification. And there are a couple of other disclosures we recommended adding just to comply with our actuarial, with our ASOPs.
Great, thanks, Janie.
You're
So
welcome.
I'm going to jump back in and circle back to something that I touched on at the beginning, talking about the actual cost method and the calculation of the normal cost. So we were able to replicate almost to the dollar the total present value of benefits that Rudd & Wisdom calculated in the actual evaluation report. Then the next step, once you've got that pie, that total pie of liability, it's okay, how are we going to carve that liability up? Let's allocate it over time. We're going to compare that to our contribution, which is a fixed contribution, and compare that to our fixed normal cost and see how those compare. Because so as I mentioned, so as you all know, every member that works a year's service, we get a fixed dollar amount. Depending on what department they're in, it might be a different dollar amount, but that impacts their benefit as well. But we expect to essentially get a fixed dollar amount every year going forward for every year of service that our active members work. So there's two pieces we need from that dollar contribution that we get for each year of service worked by the members. We have to pay for that year of current benefit accrual. And then after we paid for that years of service, that benefit accrual, everything left over is going to help us go and pay down that unfunded liability that we have. It's about $25 million right now. So there's two main components. Those two main components both need to be funded in order for us to meet our goal of eliminating the unfunded liability. And so it's important when we project out to see how long it's going to be till we pay off that unfunded liability, that we want that normal cost to be as level as possible from year to year. And really, it's quote unquote accurate as possible from year to year, so that we have a really good understanding of how much money is left over after that annual accrual is paid for, that we to have left over to pay down that unfunded liability. And so that's really what these last two bullet points are talking about, is really looking at that normal cost calculation, these actuarial allocation methods, to ensure that we know exactly how much money we're getting each year to pay down the unfunded liability. So there's two pieces of this. One is a recommendation around just an enhancement to the process to ensure even further the normal cost stays level every year and not expected to change. And then the second one really has to do with syncing up the calculation of the liability and the inflow of our contributions with the calculation of that normal cost, and kind of tracking the dollars through and making sure that the timing is consistent on when we're expecting to get, who we're expecting to get the contributions on, and who we're calculating the normal cost on. And through some pictures, hopefully that'll help kind of illustrate the concept. And again, just to what I was just saying, that we're getting a fixed dollar contribution. You can see the kind of the bubble on the left, the total contributions, and the way the model works, that's expected to stay a level dollar amount every year in the future for the next 30 years. And we have the normal cost that's paying for the current year benefit accrual, and everything that's left over is the annual payments. And since everything is on a fixed dollar amount, you know, you all know very well, it's not a pay-based plan. Some of the other plans around the state are based on the final average earnings, fixed dollar amount. So everything's expected to say level dollar in the future. So the first recommendation around the normal cost is that the method, the way it's being applied now for each individual member, that normal cost is being calculated over a different period of time for different benefits. Primarily the termination benefit, it's over a shorter period of time, and then the normal cost for that little benefit goes down, and then you have the normal cost for retirement benefits. I know it's technical, but there's an enhancement to the process that it's just a straightforward enhancement to the process to ensure that that normal cost is level for each individual member. So, right, this is an actual test case that's charted here from that Rudd & Wisdom gave us a detailed calculation, and that kind of the orangey line is the actual normal cost from the test case that we reviewed. And our enhancement would be the dark green line there that's constant through the middle of the chart, that it's based on the same liability, but it's just allocated more evenly over time. And it makes it easier to compare to that blue line, which is a contribution rate. This is a $200 a month department that we looked at. And again, when you add everybody up, all 3,600 members, you don't really see this dip in the normal costs. It all kind of averages out. But with this enhancement to the cost method, it does improve the ability of that normal cost and increase the likelihood that it would stay more level over time. Okay, so I'll pause just for a minute. We kind of thrown a lot of stuff out. Just make sure there's not any questions. Okay, so just one more idea that we want to talk about is, like I said, kind of tracking the dollars. We expect for all the 3,600 members that were participating in the plan on the valuation date, August 31st, 2020, there were 3,600 actives, and we add up all the contributions that we expect to receive on those active members. There's $3.1 million of Part 1 contributions. But what the actuarial model does, it assumes immediately on the first day of the valuation year that anybody that's expected to retire or terminate happens on day one. And there's about 16% of our active members that are expected to immediately terminate or retire. And then the other 84%, and this is all assumptions and methods, the other 84% are assumed to continue working for the entire year and earn a year's service. Well, the day that those 16% terminate, we're no longer getting their contributions, they're no longer accruing benefits, so there's no contributions, but there's also no normal cost on those 587 people. So, but of the ones that stay, we're only going to get $2.6 million in contributions. But again, the way the model works is we're expecting these contributions to stay constant. So what happens is the 587 members that terminated or retired are immediately assumed to be replaced with new recruits, new members in the plan, new volunteers. And those are hired essentially on the first, as soon as those 587 leave, they're assumed to immediately be replaced. It's just kind of the way the model works. Even though obviously that is not exactly how it happens. It happens throughout the year. We don't always replace every single position, but this is kind of how the assumptions work. So now that we've brought on these new 587 people, now we're going to start getting their contributions, and they're going to accrue that year's service. So they're going to have a normal cost as well. Now we put it all together at the end of the year. We had our 300,000 that worked all year and our 587 new recruits, and put it all together. We're back to getting our $3.1 million of Part 1 contributions and a normal cost for all 3,600 members. And I draw this illustration just to point out, based on our assessment when we went through, we're really concerned about that normal cost I've got circled there in red, the normal cost for the new members that come in during the year after the valuation date, but essentially the beginning of the year. Just the way the decrements work, there's those people at the beginning of the year are assumed to immediately terminate, and these new people that brought on, just want to ensure that normal cost is considered, and because that impacts how much money that's left over from the contributions to pay down the unfunded. So missing, if that 0.3 million or $300,000 isn't incorporated into the calculation of the unfunded liability and the projection of the unfunded liability, it could impact how long we expect. Right now, the state's expected to put in their maximum contribution for 19 years. That's the projection, but based on some of these enhancements that might change that 19 years, we might expect it to get to last a little bit longer and impact that period. So really the next phase of this, and we might have gone, this next phase is just kind of just some additional information for the board. It's a little bit outside our scope, but as Janie also mentioned, we really did really dive in and really kind of, I don't know the right word, fascinated is probably a bad word, but it's just a really complex system with a lot of unique features, as all public plans have. They all have their own special features and funding mechanisms and benefit arrangements. So as we were diving through and working through it, there were just some aspects of the financing of your retirement plan we thought were important just to mention, things that going forward you and your actuary, we encourage you to spend some time looking at these things, and it really just to understand the sensitivity of the results of your evaluation. What the likelihood, you only do your evaluation every 2 years. A lot can change in 2 years, as we all know. Lots changed just in the last 12 or 14 months. So just imagine what can happen in 2 years. with our society. So, it's important to understand the sensitivity results and how things can change if the results deviate from assumptions. So, and it really just revolves around, you're promising a fixed benefit to your members and you're getting a fixed contribution to finance that benefit. But as our members live longer and as potentially investment returns aren't expected to be as high as we might have thought they were going to be 10, 15, 20 years ago, that makes that benefit more expensive. And that fixed dollar contribution we're getting doesn't go as far. You need more of that just to pay for the current benefit. So to understand what that sensitivity is, and then just kind of do some sensitivity testing, sometimes called stress testing, just to understand what that means. And some of the risks that we pointed out in our report were, as you all know, you have departments that are regularly increasing their contribution amounts. Now, what that means is the benefits go up, but the contributions are going up together too. So they do sync up. But over the last 6 years, you expected your unfunded liability to go down $4.8 million, but you added $4.4 million in new liability because of contribution increases and benefit increases. And again, those increases were financed. And based on our modeling, it didn't really seem like it impacts that period. We expect the state to contribute money, but to really understand what it means you have these departments, and they're generally large departments with large contribution rates. So back to Janie's point about, amount weighting, and when you actually have, I think, 6 departments that account for about 25% of the liability of this plan. And my metrics might be a little bit off, but you have a small group of departments that account for a large portion of the overall plan liability. And so what they do really can drive the overall valuation results. And again, just important to understand the sensitivity of the valuation results to those impacts. When that funding period, or that 19-year funding period that the state's expected to pay, that is incorporating the anticipation that new departments are brought on, and that they're going to contribute to the plan and they're going to have members participate in the plan. There's some growth in that incorporated into that calculation, which based on your track record has been the case, that you have added departments every year. And it's reasonable to expect that to continue. But what's the sensitivity to the results if that doesn't happen? What happens if that recruitment slows down? What could that mean to the long-term financing? We're talking about 30 years. It's a long time. And if you don't have that growth in the departments, how would that impact it? And obviously the biggest one's investment returns. What if we don't get the investment returns we expect? Right? I'm sure you hear this from investment consultant, it could be lean for a period of time before we go back to historical norms on investment returns. So what would that mean although the last year has been pretty spectacular, but what would it mean if your investment returns fall short of your expectation of 7.5? So it's just doing it every 2 years, there's a lot that can happen in the sensitivity results. So just encourage you to spend some time with your actuary and looking at how your results could be different and how the projections look different if some of these things change. So with that, I know it's been a lot, and sorry, it was a little bit technical, but it felt like it's important things to bring up. This is what we're hired to do, to bring you these things and to be a technical resource for you. So hope we gave you some things to think about. Certainly think there's things to enhance the actual work product going forward and just improve the communication. And it just the more you can improve the process, it just helps transparency with your stakeholders, your departments, your governing bodies, your members, just to help set the expectations as best as possible, and just to continue managing a really important retirement system for an important part of our community. So with that, thank the TESRS staff. They did a great job supporting us throughout all of this, and Rudd and Wisdom being very quick to respond and to provide insight into their decision process and their evaluation process. So it was a great process. Thank you all for the opportunity. We're happy to answer any questions, and thanks for your patience as we walk through some kind of technical items.
Does anybody have any questions for Ryan or Michelle? Ryan, basically what I'm gleaning from this is the assumptions that we have and everything that we have done, we're in good shape, but there is room for improvement in the long term. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, that's correct. I think the assumptions for the most part are reasonable. I really think it's important to take a look at that normal cost because it really is an important component of paying down the unfunded liability. Certainly something that needs to be talked about and to ensure that it's being done in the most appropriate manner. That's why I was kind of on the first slide. So I encourage you to really take a look at that and to talk with your actuary about that. But the assumptions themselves are all pretty reasonable. Those are just ones that we just encourage you to take a close look at because of the impact they have on the valuation, how important they are.
Okay, we have a 3% assumption on inflation. What is your recommendation for inflation? Because it's all tied to the economy.
That's true. During the experience study, I think it was considered for a 2.75% inflation assumption. That was an option that was offered to the board. I wasn't involved in this conversation, so I don't know how much that was talked about. I mean, that would be more reasonable, but if you go into our report, and I don't know if we want to go into that much detail, but I encourage you to look at it. I mean, we listed all the different metrics that we would go through, the forecast. There's lots of different ways you can look at inflation and what maybe the market's indicating inflation should be, what Social Security, the federal government is kind of anticipating. There's a lot of different metrics to look at, and most of those would probably have you coming in probably closer to 2.5 than 2 3/4. But in a traditional pay-based plan, when you have like a TELFR plan that bases the benefits on final average pay, inflation is also a component of your salary increases. So when you lower your inflation, a lot of times you're pulling back on your expected investment earnings, but you're also pulling back on projected benefits and projected pay. So they have a tendency to offset each other to some degree. But in your plan, when it's all fixed dollar, that inflation assumption, if you change it, it goes straight to the bottom line on your anticipated investment returns. So your results are a little bit more sensitive to it than a pay-based plan might be. So I mean, it's an important assumption for you all. And 3, I mean, you go back 5 years, and I was a pretty strong stalwart at 3%. How could we ever assume that long-term inflation is ever going to be less than 3? But it just it continues to defy logic that inflation can stay as low as it has for so long. But the Fed has indicated that their long-term goal for inflation is closer to 2 on average. The monetary policy at this time seems to be directed towards that goal. So 3 seems, just by all indicators that we had, and your actuary and maybe your investment consultant might look at different metrics, just 3 seems high, and 2.5 is probably closer to the norm. If you look across the state, I think there was a survey in the audit report actually in the experience study report that looked at the inflation assumption across all the systems. I think you'd probably see most are less than 3. So that's just my input, my perspective.
Thank you. Does anybody have any other questions or concerns for the audit?
I have a question. This is Jerry Romero. Ryan, in regards to the comments you just made around inflation. So if we were to go back and look at an inflation rate of 2.50, you also in your slide talked about the rate of return that we currently have on the portfolio. What are we looking at there at that point then?
Well, so you're at 7.5. So that's 4.5% real return, kind of in addition to inflation, and that's stacked on top of inflation. So based on the analysis done in the experience report and what we benchmark and looked at, the 4.5% real return we thought was reasonable, and that was done in conjunction with your actuary, your investment consultant. I mean, that's when you look at the real return, really the input from your investment consultant is really important because they know your portfolio better than anybody. And I think Rudd and Wisdom relied on that quite a bit, and which is completely reasonable. And based on our benchmarking, we came in about the same place. So we felt like that was reasonable. So then you take that 4.5% real return and you stack on top of it your inflation assumption is how it's developed. So right now you have a 3% inflation assumption. So it's the 4.5 plus 3 for 7.5. So if you were to change your inflation assumption to 2.5, you'd stack that on the 4.5 real, and you'd have a long-term investment return expectation of investment returns of 7%. And so all that means is less money. You have less money accumulating for your investments to help you pay your benefits. So your contributions aren't going to go as far as they did before. It puts you in a challenging position. It might put you in a position to where you'd have to consider Part 2 contributions. And I know that's challenging. I told this to the actuarial committee earlier this week, but when I asked Wayne about Part 2 contributions, he said if they came to pass, it wouldn't be the end of the world, but it'd be pretty close. So, but what I do want to, share with you, I talked about your plan and how unique it is, that the fact you have Part 2 contributions, and I completely understand that no one wants to pay Part 2 contributions 100%, but your plan is set up to where if you fall out of line with your goals of being fully funded in 30 years, you have a plan provision automatically in place that kicks in to help you get back on track. And that is something that if you look across, especially the municipal plans across the state, that type of provision doesn't exist out there. I mean, when you're getting a fixed dollar amount and you're contributing and you're paying a fixed benefit amount, there's no give and take in there. If that contribution stops being sufficient, you have most plans in the state don't have an automatic trigger to fix themselves. And really TMRS and TCDRS are the only ones that have that. And so even though, again, no one wants to pay it, if your contribution or your Part 1 contribution rate no longer is sufficient to finance your plan and to meet your 30-year funding goals, you have a mechanism to get you back in place without having to drag yourself to the state legislature to get a bill passed, to have to change benefits. You have a mechanism in place to get you back on track. And that's just, if it ever comes to pass where you need that, hopefully you appreciate the foresight that went into putting that provision in place and the importance of having that, because you can just go across a lot of the TELFR plans across the state that are having to go through a pretty difficult process to work with their plan sponsor and to work with their members to try to get their plan back in line, because it's a challenging process. So anyway, long answer, but good question.
Anybody else have any questions for the actuaries?
Jenny, this is Shirley, and I do appreciate Ryan and Jenny's presentations, their work when we met with the actuarial committee yesterday. As he mentioned, whenever he began the process, I just wanted to let the board know that we have the draft report, which is in the longer report, and it's in your board materials. And in the next couple of weeks, we will be taking the recommendations that they've outlined in that draft report, and we make a response to each, and we'll be working with Mark to get that together. Then that's provided back to GRS for incorporation in their final report. And our goal is to have that final report back for the board at the May 20th meeting. So I just wanted to, update the board on that particular process.
Shirley, do we need a motion to accept the draft report or for you to continue moving forward with this process?
Personally, whenever you read through the government code about this process, this is getting this work done and getting a draft report, going through the process is something that we tried this in the fall. So our timeframes kept getting kind of scrunched, kind of pushed together. So the process itself is pretty clear cut, and that we would follow through with this. And since it is a draft report, I would think that the May final report is where the board would accept the report.
Okay. I believe that's correct. Mark, do you have anything else to add to this conversation, sir?
Well, I would again just thank Ryan and Janie for their thorough job. And I would say that different actuaries have different opinions about different assumptions. And they're for the very long-term future, and no one really knows what the future is going to be like. So they're educated guesses, and they're not right or wrong. They're either reasonable or unreasonable, and there's a range of reasonableness. But we will carefully consider the recommendations in their report, and we'll work with Shirley and Wayne to respond in writing that will be incorporated into their final report. We'll have some time to test some of the recommendations, and that will help us to in the way we respond. But we certainly think there's a number of things to learn from in their report. Shirley, you're muted. I mean, Jenny, you're muted.
Ryan, Janie, thank you so much for your due diligence. We appreciate it. You brought a lot to the board for everybody to consider. Mark, as always, nice tie. Okay, so since we don't need a board motion or anything, I think we can move on to the next agenda item. Ryan, Janie, thank y'all. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Executive Director's Report. Shirley? You're muted.
Yes, thanks. I'm going to do what I can to share my screen. Okay. I wanted to give the board some updates about system activity. I think that this is something that I'd like to keep, keep some statistics, keep some numbers in front of the board, because I think that we can learn a lot from some trends and target our efforts, appropriately. I wanted to give an update about our recruiting efforts and the annual reports and qualified service and the administrative penalty letters that just recently went out, and a brief update on the training project. The session right now, Wayne and I keep looking at the actions that are on the floor of the House or the Senate. Everything's moving along. Our exceptional item request for money to come back from the state contribution was moved into Article 11 and of the bill, and we're guardedly optimistic about that, but I'm prepared for that to not happen, actually. One thing that's very important that we recently did, we've got some staffing changes that will be effective May 1st. Shana will move into the position as contract manager and deputy director. She has a lot of years experience with the agency. She's a certified contract manager. She is certified with regard to procurement. She'll retain that activity. And because of her experience with departments when she was in the part of the benefits team, I think she'll be I think that job is a really good fit. I think she will do well. Cassandra Davis is our tenured benefits specialist. And she will move into the position, the staff services officer position with HR and purchasing. And she will also serve as team lead for the benefits team. Her experience with our database, with enrollment, retirement, billing, the billing process is, you know, we all have to keep doing what we know, and but I think that that's going to work out well. And as the benefits team gains experience, and you know, I think that that role for her will not be quite a big part of her job until we can get the benefits team up and running. We will post a job for a benefits specialist. Hopefully we can get it posted next week, now that we've made these staffing changes. So we would still have 2 benefits specialists, with Cassandra serving as a team lead. I wanted to show y'all some of these numbers because I don't know how often if you've ever seen them. I don't know. I think it's good to know what we do, what our benefits team and payroll does every month. We've in March, we processed 28 retirement applications with an average day to complete those just under 40 days. A lot of times an application will come in that is missing a piece of information, usually a driver's license. And I think that us getting a copy of the driver's license has been a good move. It helps us to be sure that we have you know, the right information for the right individual. In March, we had the number of payees, unduplicated payees that we have in the system is a little over 3,800, and we paid out over $600,000 in benefit payments, with the average benefit around $160. This is a membership count. Now, there's something important to note as you look at this. January and February, you see how the number of entries, the number of terminations, that especially, you know, how they're big numbers compared to March. That's because it's annual report season in January and February. And a department will get their annual report, their draft, they review it, they look at it, they need to add people, they need to terminate some people. So that's, to me, that's going to be the 2 months that we see that kind of activity more so than the rest of the year. And when we look at this and you look at the numbers about how many came in and how many retired or terminated from the system, and this really feeds into some of the things that Ryan was talking about. The True Blue 27% represents how many 502s, how many people join the system. You know, the 42% and the 23%, those green and then that blue-green area, that's how many people left. That's a representation of how our retirements and terminations look in comparison to new enrollees in the system. And obviously this is a pie chart that I hope that we can implement some strategies and do some things with regards to recruitment, and not with marketing and recruitment in order to get those numbers up. I think marketing is a huge piece of this, because you got to market to a large population in order to find those that will have the interest to join the system. Scott provided me his list of the interested departments that he's working with. And, you know, some of these he's been working with a long time. Reeves County is a new ESD that's trying to get things together. I think there's been some, they're still discussing, still trying to figure out if Pecos the Volunteer Fire Department, which is a member of our system, is going to be included in that ESD. And I want to be very, very involved, I guess, with that process, because we want a smooth transition for Pecos if that's going to happen. You know, some of these departments represent, when I was, I will look at them on the fire department directory through Texas A&M, and to the extent that those numbers are accurate has always been in question. I kind of think they're about 85% accurate most of the time, but most of these departments had somewhere around 20 active volunteers. And like I said, it's not particularly reliable, but still, you know, we've had 2 recent departments come in that I think we've talked about before, Williamson County ESD and Gonzales ESD came in April. The other thing that I think is going to help us a lot with our recruiting is that we are going to, it looks like there's going to be in-person conferences. The SFFMA conference in Lubbock in June, it's going to be an abbreviated schedule. We need to find out if there's going to be a vendor room where we can have a vendor booth, and even if it's for just part of the day on Saturday, I just think it would be worth. I think it would be worth our having a presence there to market to those that are going to be in attendance. TEEX is in July in College Station. That's always well attended, and Safe D will be in Fort Worth in September. And Safe D, both TEEX and Safe D to me are some of our best opportunities. Safe D with the ESDs that come and the ESD commissioners that come for their educational opportunities at that conference. And since it will be September, we'll be, you know, further down, further out on the calendar to make that conference hopefully a well-attended conference. And those conferences, those in-person conferences, I think will really make a difference in finding those interested departments that we can recruit. With regard to the annual reporting of qualified service, we sent our letters regarding the assessment of administrative penalty out. We sent those out yesterday. We sent 20, and a couple of those I think have come back with some questions that where we've looked in our system. We've looked in some of the tracking, the tracking system that we have, and I think a couple of those are actually going to be okay. That it was through the tracking system that sometimes we're not, it's not exactly perfect timing, I guess, whenever we identify these departments and move forward with the letters. But one thing about the letters is that it will, for several, they do pick up the phone and call when they get a letter that says we've assessed a $600 penalty. That penalty was for $500 for the late report and a 1-month surcharge for the month of March. All of that is, you know, based on the rule for required reports and administrative penalties. And we will be working with, we've got 9 departments we're working with practically daily to get them in shape and get their report in. And we will be working with the the 20. With regard to the training plan, this was, I updated this a little bit from last time. One thing I'd like to have that I've implemented is that I would like some of our staff to be subject matter experts on certain rules. I think that our death benefit rule is very complex, and you know, in dealing with benefits to beneficiaries, benefits to surviving spouses, and benefits to a surviving spouse who also is a beneficiary. So that sometimes the language in that rule is very complicated to me, and we need to boil it down into something that's meaningful that we can provide, either provide some training about, or we can have something available on the website. I've asked Scott to outline the delegation of board duties to the executive director. This is when the board fails to be constituted or fails to do the requirements of the local board. And we need to know that process, and we need to know it well. And we need to take a look at a couple of departments to see if this is actually, that they are in that, have, you know, their board is in such a state that this may be something that we need to really look at to consider. In April and May, I'd like to have some curriculum developed and some modules developed. When I talk about modules, I think about a PowerPoint presentation that's about 7 minutes, and breaking everything down into meaningful chunks of information. What are the responsibilities of each local board member? What's the responsibilities of the firefighter member, of the government, the representative from government, the representatives from the community? Because we have information in our rules about those responsibilities. In June, we'll be approaching the MRR coming out in the 1st of August. And so I'd like to have a couple of modules ready to go that we could offer to local board members about their individual responsibilities, as well as the responsibility of the board as a body with regard to certifying that MRR. Okay. Do y'all have any questions for me?
Matt, Matt, you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Sure. I've got one question on your differences between retired and terminated. Are we making the assumption that when you hit retirement age, or those people that just leave the department, or people that actually turn in for retirement?
Those are retirement people that left, the retirement, the members that have retired.
Okay.
Now, you bring up a point about to retire, you have to terminate. So it may not be a one-to-one, but whenever somebody leaves the system, as Ryan was talking about, and there's the assumption that we're going to replace them. I think that's something that we're going to have to, I want to be aware. I want to know, I think we all want to know on a regular basis what that looks like. And, Matt, I'll get with Jessica. We'll see if we can't find that unduplicated number of people that leave, whether it's termination or retirement.
Right.
And maybe my pie chart for the next board meeting won't be so looks so bad, but we'll see if we can't find that unduplicated number.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Shirley?
Yes, Madam Chair, this is Jerry. Shirley, just to follow up on that question, is there a distinct difference between a terminated person and a retired person? I'm assuming that there is, right?
Absolutely.
So a terminated person is someone who has been let go from the position that they hold with this organization. And a retired person is someone who's seeking retirement from the system?
Well, a retired person is someone that's receiving a benefit. And that person would have been terminated, and we have to be terminated from the active roster to retire. Now, a lot of people are terminated and don't retire. They just leave. They've been there 2 or 3 years. They quit. They move. And those terminated members are part of the pool that is non-vested terminated. There's others that will leave that are vested. They terminate. They have 10 or more years of credit. They may or may not be age 55. We have routinely for the last, I don't know, year or two, really made efforts to reach out to those vested terminated members to let them know that there's a benefit available to them. They're over 8, they're 55 or older, and we'll mail out their benefit statement and an application. We've got a pretty large box of everything stuffed and ready to go. We're not mailing them out at once because I think it would overwhelm the benefits team to process those. And I don't know how many we get back out of a batch of, say, 20. We might get back 5 or 6. One thing that we'll get letters back that tell us that we've got a bad address. And so that will trigger us to either contact the department, try to find out a better address so we can reach people.
Yeah, I guess I'm just wondering if it would make sense to actually have a termination section where a person is actually terminated for non-performance versus someone who terminates because they're retiring. That's a bit confusing.
Okay, Jerry, I think where you're getting confused is, and that's where this whole system, it gets a little bit convoluted, is when the local board terminates someone, it comes in on the paperwork to the state that says we have this many active members, this is how many we're going to pay for. So if someone leaves and transfers to another department, then they're transferred from their department A. They go to department B and they're still held. If someone transfers for a job as a volunteer, their regular job, they transfer to another city, they're going to hang on. Some of them they're terminated from that department, but they still may join up with another department later. Life changes. So they may join up with another department, but we still have to carry them on the unfunded liabilities until they get paid or whatever. They have to have at least 10 years of service or more before they can draw a benefit. The other part to this is just because they turn 55 and they're eligible to draw that, some firefighters, most, as was shown in the actuarial audit, they still hold on to maybe I can join up with this fire department again later on. So a terminated person doesn't mean that we fire anybody. It's they're no longer a member of that department locally. Is it clear as mud? Is it clear as mud now?
No, I get that, and I understand what you're saying. The termination is part of the retirement process if a person chooses to retire. I guess my question is, are there truly any terminations within these different systems for non-performance?
This is a good question because I think we run into this a lot, and some departments will, I guess, and it's based on the department's processes and bylaws. If when we talk about termination and adding new members. We're talking about new enrollment in the retirement system or termination from enrollment in the retirement system. It has nothing to do with, obviously, if a chief terminates somebody because they're not meeting the requirements that that department has for a firefighter. Well, if you let them go, we terminate their enrollment in the retirement system. Our system is strictly related to their enrollment in a plan that provides them with on-duty benefits, off-duty benefits. And it doesn't really relate now in terms of performance with regard to qualified service. Qualified service is an annual requirement. And whether a member of a department meets qualified service or not actually has nothing to do with their enrollment in the retirement system. They're enrolled. If they're active and they're in good standing with the department, they are enrolled. And the management of the members of the department is up to the chief. But the enrollment in retirement system for benefits, and you may have somebody, I think I'd like to encourage department chiefs to, this is a benefit that the member has for every year of the qualified service. And if somebody's falling short on qualified service, say, hey, step it up, get some training or step up some responses where you can get your year of credit. But, we can look at benefit statements that where people have been enrolled and they're active and they're covered by that on-duty, their active member benefits, on-duty death, off-duty death, on-duty disability, whether they ever earn a year of qualified service.
Jerry, we drop at least 15 a year for not making credit. We're very aggressive. We review our participation quarterly. So we're very on that. We take our commitment and our oath very seriously. And if you're not making credit, you're gone.
There are rules you do have to work for your pension. There is specific rules that says, yes, you have to work for your pension. Whether they're terminated from their fire department, that's up to the chief. Whether they make their pension is up to the local board. So it's a whole other, it's convoluted, but it's not.
And Ed makes a good point, because when it's up to the department to have their policies, their what their expectation is of their members. And like Ed mentioned, they're they've taken the pension system benefit as a carrot, I guess, and that they want to, because the qualified service requirements are in place to be sure that you've got somebody that's showing up, you've got somebody that's trained. And some departments, it's, that like Ed explained, as a department, they're going to incorporate this in their policies. Other departments are looking at it as for our purposes, it's an annual requirement. For 20 hours of training, which I think would be very hard for somebody to not get. And then the 25% of emergencies. The local board can or should have a policy about how their qualified service for emergencies is calculated. We have departments that have members that they work offshore. They work 60 miles away from where they live. And so there's going to be certain calls. They're not going to be there to show up. But
I understand. I have a better understanding of it now. It's just the way the term is used. It's not necessarily termination from the standpoint of what you would see from an employee being terminated from a position. So now I have a better picture of it. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else, Shirley?
No, I think that's it.
Any more questions for Shirley? All right. Let's move on to agenda item number 6, authority to issue requests for qualifications for outside counsel. Shayna, is this yours?
It's mine. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. In your board binder, you should find a memorandum from me advising that the contract with Jackson Walker is set to expire at the end of this fiscal year, August 31st, 2021. The outside counsel services are legal services that are outside of scope of legal advice provided by the Attorney General. So things like plan qualification, eligibility determinations, statutes and rules, interpretation and advice. And sometimes they also help us with investment contracts. We are seeking the board's authority to issue a request for qualifications. We're set to issue that if the board grants us the authority on the first week of May. And then we should have some qualified firms to present at the July meeting.
Okay, and this is in reference to the contract with Jackson Walker, yes?
Yes, that's right. They're our current contractor.
And we've already issued them a 1-year extension, or did we?
We had a 6-year contract with them. Outside counsel services work a little differently than other contracts in that the Attorney General's office has to approve them, and they approve them in 2-year increments. So if we move forward with this, we would contract with them for, say, 4 years potentially, and then we would, within that time, we'd have to twice apply for permission with the Attorney General's office to retain them.
Okay, so you need a board motion to move forward with this, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Madam Chair, I move to authorize staff to issue an RFQ for outside counsel services.
Motion by Pilar,
I'll second.
second by,
Courtney or Jerry, either one.
okay, we have a motion on the floor to issue the RFP or RFQ, I'm sorry, RFQ. Any more discussion? Shayna, could you do roll call, please, for this agenda item?
Pilar Rodriguez,
Aye.
Courtney Bechtel,
Aye.
Nathan Douglas,
Aye.
Matt Glaves,
Aye.
Ed Keenan,
Aye.
Jerry Romero, was that an aye, Mr. Romero?
Yes, it was. I'm sorry. Aye.
Oh, okay, great. And Rodney Riles.
Aye.
Madam Chair, 7 board members are in favor of the motion and 0 are opposed.
Perfect, motion carries. Thank you. Future agenda items. That would go to you again, Shayna?
I've got agenda item 7, board minimum educational requirements.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's, yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I've provided this to the board in the past, but just for new members, I thought I'd just provide you a summary. So this is the summary of the minimum educational training requirements that are set by the PRB. And so for the first year, you have to get 7 hours of training. And the content areas of the first 7 hours are pretty rigid. Fiduciary matters, governance, ethics, investments, actuarial matters, benefits administration, and risk management. And until you get those 7, you can't go on to then get your 2 hours, or I'm sorry, 4 hours every 2 years of continuing education credit. So you have to knock out those 7 hours, and then you, going forward, every 2 years, you need 4 hours of the continuing education. And that can be, that's more relaxed. And I think there's more places where you can find those continuing education credits, whereas the core content is a little difficult, especially during COVID when a lot of the trainings were canceled. But so the reason we're presenting this now is because TESRS is actually offering both the advanced training and the basic training classes for trustees on May 22nd in Austin. So anyone that feels comfortable traveling and attending those in person, I can definitely get you registered and help you with your travel arrangements. We just wanted to bring that up so y'all know that that was coming up shortly.
And just to add to that, the TESRS training is pretty intense especially for the new board members. It's excellent training. You'll learn a lot, and you'll have the opportunity to talk to other people that are involved in the pension business. So if you have a chance on May 22nd, get with Shana, sign up, and go if you're comfortable with the COVID restrictions. Shana, go ahead. I'm sorry.
And that's, unless someone has questions, that's it for that.
I do, Shana. This is Matt Glaves. The 7 hours, is that what we originally got from Kevin that was online that we did? It was all the same subject matter. Do you have that on file for us?
Yes, absolutely. If you did the online trainings on the PRB website, I have those certifications, and they fulfill those requirements for the 7 hours.
Okay.
And then you can move on to get continuing education credits at your leisure.
Okay.
Any other questions for Shana? Nice. Then I guess we'll move on to agenda item number 8. Future agenda items and meeting dates.
Jenny?
Yes, ma'am.
And board members, I would like for the members to make note that we have cybersecurity training scheduled for, I believe, April 29th and May 13th. This training, we will have a Zoom meeting, a regular board meeting that we will convene, and then we will go, we'll mute and close our cameras and leave the board meeting running and move to another meeting, either GoToMeeting or another platform if we can figure one out, but would move to another meeting in order to close session in order to have that cybersecurity training.
Is this one or the other or both?
It will be both days, the 29th and the 13th will be regular meetings that we'll convene the meeting and then go to closed session. And there will be so the training is, I believe, an hour. One reason the reason to move to closed session would be to allow the board to openly discuss in closed session with Denham Group any particular items regarding cybersecurity about the pension system, and that seemed to be the best approach. Where because if certain training is provided in an open session, then there's certain particular aspects of it that would not be appropriate to have those discussions in an open session. We've also we've asked about makeup sessions. This training is also a requirement, I believe, of from DIR that board members and staff are trained. You know, it's always a changing environment, so we'll be getting information to you about those 2 sessions, and then our regular board meeting is scheduled for May 20th.
Nathan Douglas here. May I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
I speak for myself and not others. The sooner you can get those calendar invites out, the better it is for me. And then second, I realize the security training is state mandated. I think I already know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyways. Can that also count for our CE hours, or is that 2 separate things?
We'll find out. I don't know if we know, Shayna, if there's credit for your continuing ed on cybersecurity.
I don't believe so, but I'll double check on that.
I appreciate that. I try to double and triple dip as much as possible. When you have an EMT, a fire, and a police cert, and now a TESRS cert, got to get as many as I can.
Okay, so April 29th is about an hour of cybersecurity. May 13th is about an hour of cybersecurity, and May 20th is our regular board meeting. And then you will be going to TESRS or safety, and we'll discuss that at the next board meeting. Anything else anybody wants to add to the agenda? Any upcoming issues that we need to discuss possibly? Okay. Good meeting. Thank you all. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
Motion by Ed Keenan, second by,
I'll second that.
all those in favor say aye.
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 Thank you, guys. I will see y'all on April 29th. Good meeting.
Y'all have a good one.
All right, thank you.
Shirley, I'm going to give you a call. Okay, I got something to discuss